You know the story. It's one of the best-selling book series of all time, a global cultural phenomenon that pretty much defined a generation. But before it was this massive franchise, Harry Potter was just an idea. So let's get into it. This is the story of how a boy wizard went from the rejection pile to the literary canon and the wild critical debate that followed him every single step of the way. To give you a sense of just how huge this thing is, take a look at this number. That's roughly how many Harry Potter-related items you can find on Amazon right now. And we're not just talking books and movies, oh no. We're talking about everything from Lego sets to, and I am not making this up, Expecto Patronum dog feeding mats. It's a full-blown cultural empire. And that really is the central question here, isn't it? How did we get here? How does a story, a manuscript that got passed on again and again and again, somehow catch fire and spread across the entire globe? Well, the answer doesn't start with some big explosion. It starts with a quiet and very persistent struggle. Right, so before Harry was the boy who lived, he was the boy who was rejected. The origin story of this magical world is actually grounded in some very real-world setbacks that almost kept it from ever reaching us at all. So the whole journey kicked off way back in 1990, when the idea for Harry Potter famously just popped into J.K. Rowling's head on a delayed train. But get this. It took another 5 years of writing before an agent even agreed to take it on in '96. And it wasn't until June of 1997 that the first book finally hit the shelves in the UK. That's a 7-year journey from a spark of an idea to an actual book in someone's hands. And believe me, that journey was anything but smooth. The door was slammed in her face over and over. At least 12 different publishers turned the manuscript down flat. Just think about that for a second. A story that would go on to sell hundreds of millions of copies was, for a very long time, a story that nobody seemed to want. So who finally said yes? Well, the decision didn't come from some high-powered editor in a stuffy office. It came down to this simple, incredibly powerful review. The chairman of Bloomsbury Publishing gave the first chapter to his 8-year-old daughter, Alice. She came back, just glowing, and said this. That endorsement, from the book's actual target audience, is what finally got Harry Potter published. And you know what? Alice Newton wasn't alone. Before the giant marketing campaigns, before the movie deals, and way before any of the literary critics even cared to notice, the book's first and most powerful army of champions was an army of kids. Seriously, the first big wave of hype didn't come from critics, it came directly from kids. The book won the Smarties Prize in '97 based entirely on children's votes. The very next year, it swept every single major British book award that was chosen by children. The hype got so real that by the third book, bookstores had to schedule its release for 3:45 in the afternoon, specifically to stop kids from ditching school to go buy it. So, as this kid-powered phenomenon got bigger and bigger, it was only a matter of time before it crossed the pond to America. And with that massive success, came attention from a totally different crowd. We're talking about the mainstream literary establishment. And the first thing that happens when it gets to the US, they change the name. The American publisher Scholastic was worried that the word philosopher sounded a little too stuffy, a little too old-fashioned, and that it just wouldn't click with young readers. They wanted a title that just screamed magic. It seems like a small change, but it was a pretty big deal. On the left, you've got the original UK title, Philosopher's Stone, and on the right, the new American title that would become famous in the States, Sorcerer's Stone. Same incredible story, but a brand new name for a brand new market. Now, Rowling actually agreed to the change, but she later said she kind of regretted it. As a debut author, she was just thrilled that anyone was publishing her at all. And this quote, man, it really shows you where she was at, you know? It captures that vulnerability and the tough choices authors have to make early on. And the success in the US was, well, it was instant and massive. So massive, in fact, that by the year 2000, Harry Potter books were just completely dominating the top spots on the New York Times fiction bestseller list. This got other publishers so worked up that the Times created a completely separate list just for children's books, a change that is still in place today. But you know how it goes. With that much popularity, you're gonna get some side-eye. You're gonna get skepticism. And as the hype kept building, some people in the literary world started asking, is this really art, or is it just a well-marketed fad? And that backlash started to get loud, with critics like Philip Hensher. When Prisoner of Azkaban was being considered for a major British literary award, up against work by a Nobel laureate, Hensher wrote that it was a sign of the infantilization of adult culture.
The big question was, should a kid's book even be in the running for these serious grown-up awards?
And he wasn't the only one. William Safire over at the New York Times basically said the same thing. He argued that, unlike classics such as Huckleberry Finn, the Harry Potter series just didn't have those deeper layers of meaning that can really hook an adult reader. He was basically saying, yeah, it's fun, but it's not exactly high art. But maybe the biggest heavyweight to step into the ring was Harold Bloom, one of America's most respected literary scholars. He didn't just have some minor issues with it, he had, and I quote, outright scorn for the series. He questioned its literary merits and pretty much suggested that 35 million book buyers could in fact all be wrong. Okay, so let's pause for a second, because it's important to understand what we mean when we say literary criticism. This isn't just about saying I liked it or I hated it. It's a deep dive, a real analysis of a book's structure, its themes, and where it fits in the grand scheme of literature. Critics like Bloom were looking at Potter through that very specific, very academic lens. So while this whole debate was raging on, another group of people, academics, started looking at these books through a totally different lens. They weren't just seeing a children's story, they were seeing something ancient, something archetypal. They started making this really interesting argument that the reason the books were so incredibly popular was because they tap into these ancient, timeless stories that are kind of hardwired into us. They saw Harry's story not as something new, but as a modern retelling of one of the oldest stories we have, the hero's journey. This whole idea is often called the monomyth, a theory made famous by the scholar Joseph Campbell. It breaks down like this. First, the departure. Harry leaves the normal, boring world of the Dursleys for the magical world of Hogwarts. Check. Next, the initiation. He faces trial after trial, from the Sorcerer's Stone all the way to the final battle with Voldemort. Check. And finally, the return. He comes back with the power to bring peace to his world. Check. It's a pattern you see everywhere, from ancient Greek myths all the way to Star Wars. And the reason this structure resonates so deeply is because on some level it's our story too. The story of leaving what's familiar, facing our own dragons, and returning a little bit different. So it all comes back to this central question, doesn't it? The story of Harry Potter makes us ask, what really makes a modern classic? Is it the approval of literary experts, or is it the overwhelming passion of millions of readers? Is a classic something that has to follow all the old rules, or is it something that comes along and completely rewrites them? The question isn't just about Harry Potter. It's about who gets to decide which stories we remember.